Ladies and gentlemen, if you can find your seats, we'd like to resume our chats. Well, welcome back from the coffee break and the delicious pastries. And we begin now with Plenary Session 2, Pursuing a More Open Parliament, Management and Organizational Issues. I just have one technical item to report to you that was given to me by one of the technical people. As you sit at those screens, if you tap them twice, you'll get a full screen if that doesn't happen. If you want to see the slides and get rid of some of the navigational buttons. If you haven't already done that, just tap your screen twice, and that will take care of it. What's that? With a bit of energy. It's getting more complicated. My name is Jeff Griffith. I'm Senior Advisor to the Global Center for ICT in Parliament. Before that, I worked for a number of years here in the U.S. Congress, working on IT challenges. We never had any projects, we just had challenges. Certainly open standards and especially XML are obviously very technically challenging to implement. Those of you who have been engaged in that know that only too well. Equally difficult, and in my experience in some cases even more difficult, are some of the management and organizational and policy issues that can arise when you attempt to adapt some of this latest technology. And technology, as we all know, is often disruptive, at least for someone and often for many people, and dealing with these disruptions can be an enormous challenge. On the other hand, as ICT continues to permeate so many aspects of our social and personal lives, there can also be pressure to introduce these new technologies, sometimes faster than we can do it or faster than the institutional procedures can accommodate it. And sometimes this pressure comes from the members themselves. So it can be the organizational management and policy issues can be a challenge on both sides. So our speakers in this last morning session will share some of their experiences and some of their insights in dealing with these challenges and pressures. We'll begin with John Pullinger. John is the Director General of Information Services at the House of Commons in the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Jeff. When Gerardo sent me the exam question for this morning on management and organisational challenges, I wasn't short of ideas as to what to do, but I did struggle to think where to start. And I sat in my office, which is a very nice old office looking out over Big Ben, and an image came into my mind. And that set for me, I think, the touchstone for what I will say to you this morning, which is very much about the UK. And when I started writing it, I thought, well, it is going to be very UK-focused. But having listened to the first session this morning, we're not uniquely blessed with the challenges, and actually my guess is there's probably going to be more resonance than I thought there might have been. And the image that came into my head was of last year when President Obama came to the UK to address both houses of Parliament in Westminster Hall. And at the end of his address, he spent, I think it was about 3/4 of an hour, walking down the hall, talking to people, talking to members of Parliament, to staff, to everybody. And I don't know what his reputation is like here just now, maybe it depends who you ask. But in terms of giving a spirit of openness and engagement with the room, it was a very powerful symbol, particularly in that particular place. Westminster Hall was first used as a parliamentary building by King Stephen in the 12th century, and we excavated recently, when we were digging up the flagstones in the hall, his table. And so as President Obama was walking down the hall, I then had a picture of King Stephen and exactly what kind of spirit of openness and transparency might have been going on in that precise same building in the 12th century, and I think it was rather different. And our challenge, I think, is very much trying to think about openness and transparency in what is a very ancient parliament. It's not the most ancient in the world, but it goes back a long way. In a building which is a World Heritage Site at least as much as it is a working legislature, and has a whole bunch of issues because of that are physical issues. But in many ways, more profoundly, the fact we've never written down our constitution, we've just kind of evolved it from even earlier than King Stephen, over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. We've evolved it to take account of modernity and the fact that in a modern world, openness and transparency is a kind of central tenet. But we don't start from that position. So the kind of psychology of Parliament isn't actually, in its deepest sense, about the people. Which in most countries have actually sat down and thought about their constitutions, it usually is. And particularly in this country. When you look at the constitution, it hits you. And in the United Kingdom, the Westminster Parliament isn't the only parliament, and in the last decade or so, we've set up some new parliamentary assemblies, the most obvious and strongest of which is in Scotland, where they've set up a parliament on modern principles, with a building designed to be open and transparent, with a system of politics designed to engage the public, and it looks and feels very different to Westminster. But strangely, and it hit me again this morning hearing from Brazil and Canada, the management challenges are maybe less different than we might think. So a little bit of what happened in the UK. We had a Leader of the House in the early 2000s, so 10 years or so ago, who set up a modernisation committee precisely to confront the kind of issues that I've talked about, that we have a parliament that is very much rooted in the past. A lot of commentators were describing our situation as Parliament having a crisis of legitimacy, because we were not connecting with our citizens, we were not open, we were not transparent, we were not hitting the kind of spot that we should do. And that committee produced a very influential report called Connecting Parliament with the Public. And that came to a vote on the 26th of January 2005. Now, the reason that sticks very much in my mind is I came into my current position at Christmas of 2004, so this is my first month in the job. So I was looking at this vote, it was very much part of my own managerial responsibilities, and the vote was 375 to 14. Now, it is extremely unusual in our Parliament to have such a decisive vote. And this was a vote to make a dramatic shift in the way in which our House of Commons engaged with its people. Similar arguments were going on in our House of Lords, and Parliament as a whole concluded it needed to go forward together as a joint endeavour to connect Parliament as an institution with its citizens. And back to the question that Jeff was asking the other panellists this morning, so what were you trying to achieve? We actually defined what we were trying to achieve, and this was 6 years ago, and we haven't achieved it yet, but we still would define what we're trying to do in pretty much the same way. We want the public actually to see us as welcoming, working for citizens rather than working for the members, worthwhile, i.e. not a waste of taxpayers' money, but most significantly relevant to the interests and concerns of individual people in their lives. After all, what is democracy about if it's not to enable people to influence the environment in which they live? So we'd set ourselves some metrics, and we have an annual audit of political engagement done by an independent research agency that tracks how we're doing against these things. So that was our goal. The aims, and we started exploring this morning, were first of all to inform people. And it was absolutely clear in the British concept that our biggest enemy was ignorance. The public had very little idea of what Parliament was trying to do. So inform them, tell them what we're doing, promote what we're doing, actually explain why it's a good thing, why it's something that they should be interested in, but then most fundamentally in our environment, to listen. So when we actually got something coming back from the people, Parliament would have some ability to think how to interpret what the people were saying to us and what we should do about that. And the discussion about Vic that we had from Mark just before the coffee break shows the challenges of when Parliament says something and the people say something back, and then, hey, what do we do about that? But in short, the whole thrust of this Modernisation Committee report was we must be more open. So I'm going to split my challenges into two sections, and they fit the timetables of our parliamentary sessions. The parliamentary timetable sets everything we do in the UK, as I'm sure happens in your own assemblies. Now, in the period 2005 to 2010, we focused on three main areas for development. The first one was the website, the primary medium by which we could communicate with the public in both directions. And that was the strongest feature of this Modernisation Committee report. It was the strongest feature of what members were saying to us. But it wasn't straightforward. And the first thing that really struck me, and I have one moment in my mind where it shifted, that previously we'd had a website for many years before that, and we'd had a development of a website. We'd hire some people in, they would make it look very pretty and it would look more new, and everyone would say, hey, we've done the website, and then we'd go away again and wait for the next time. The change we tried to adopt here is to see the website as a core capability of Parliament, not just another IT project that the IT guys did and then went away till the next time. Let's invest in an ongoing dialogue with the people we want to communicate with. Use a focus on this slide. And that seemed pretty obvious to me. And we hired in a young guy to run the website, and it was pretty obvious to him as well. And then we had a meeting with senior parliamentarians from both houses who saw the designs that we'd come up with and the approach we were going to take, and said, but we don't want to, we want to say this, we want to do that. And what we had done to inform our work at that point was to get a series of groups of the different user communities looking at how we should structure our website, how we communicate with people, and very straightforwardly said, but 95% of your users will not understand what you're saying if you present it that way. The language isn't easy to understand, the structure isn't easy to follow, they won't be able to find what they want. And at that moment, a very senior politician suddenly had the light bulb go on, and he set the tone for the rest of it. So the members realised that if we're having a website, the website is primarily for the people using it, not for the politicians trying to use it for themselves. So that was fine. That was one light bulb moment. The second light bulb moment was inside the House, primarily amongst officials. And we still haven't really completed this, but it's getting a lot better. That everybody within the House service, within the parliamentary service, has to see the website as part of them. And the most obvious example, and it's particularly challenging example in Congress here, is getting committees to see themselves not just as presenting the views of their chairman in the way their chairman wants to do things, but to see the ability to compare and contrast across all committees. That came up in the question this morning. Presenting things in a common way, on a common platform, with a common voice, that the citizens will be able to understand and navigate their way around different committees. not just get to one. So we needed buy-in across Parliament for a collective endeavour to communicate with the public. So website development was the biggest challenge of the 2005-10 period. But we also recognised that you can't do everything in a virtual space. Openness and transparency isn't only about technology. And so we had two other elements to our management strategy. The first was to make the building more welcoming. Now, we haven't, sadly, had the opportunity that you've had here. I remember coming here in 2007 doing a hard hat tour of this place, and it was inspiring. And one day we may have one of these in London, but not anytime soon. You spent too much money for that, for anyone to think we would ever be able to find that kind of cash. But we must make the place more welcoming. And it wasn't. Because the primary image you get coming up to the Houses of Parliament in the UK has always been a policeman with a gun and someone telling you you're going to be kept out. So we've done a lot just to put welcomers on the doors, be welcome when you come in, help people find their way around. But most fundamentally of all, parliaments are working buildings. Politicians come here to do their work. They need to have privacy, they need to have space. They don't need to have thousands of school children getting in their way when they're dashing down to vote, which quite often happens in our place. But we have systematically, I think, tackled that question to say it is important that the public feel they are being welcomed into this space. It is not only for members, it's not only about security, it's not only about the maintenance of the building, which tended to be the three dominant features before. But, I mean, I chair a parliamentary visitor board, and that problem is always going to be endemic in parliaments, that you have conflicts over space. But progressively, welcoming people in is becoming a key determinant of how we're using the space, and we must make sure that it continues to be that way. But then finally, I mean, London is in the southeastern corner of our country. It is a very long way away from most of the country. The final part of our challenge was to get out to the rest of the country. Now, when we started this strategy, there was a very strong feeling amongst members that this was what they did. That we, as an administration, as a management, shouldn't be in the business of reaching out to people in communities around the country. But 5 years on, members, pretty much all of them, can't see how they did without it. Because they and their staff are focused on a very particular task, which is often about their party, a particular political interest they have, a political set of issues that are intensely political. None of them are primarily there to promote Parliament itself, to promote engagement in the legislative process, to promote engagement with committees, to get involved and participate in the broader business of Parliament. We're now doing that, and members are our strongest supporters. But they wouldn't do it themselves and couldn't do it themselves. And technology really does help in that, which I'll come to. So moving on to the current Parliament, and this does get very exciting because we began this story with our modernisation committee, which was fundamentally about the leader of the House driving an agenda which the House then voted for. But we have a bunch of things that happened in our election in 2010 that have given us, I think now, a unique window to make a very dramatic step forward. The first is an election of a new Speaker in the Commons. We've also had a new Speaker in the House of Lords as well, both of whom are very much committed to openness and outreach. And in the Commons in particular, to revitalising the way the Chamber of the House of Commons works and the way it connects with what people are interested in. There was a committee on reform of the House that gave a lot more power to backbenchers to drive the agenda of the day, gave a much stronger role for committees and particularly committee chairmen, and also very specifically saw that our public role should go substantially beyond a provision of information to an encouragement to participate. And then on top of that, like Canada, we've had a huge influx of new members, which has changed the demographic very significantly. We've still got the old one. We mustn't forget this. You've still got the old ones. So you can't just rush forward because you've got a few hundred new members. You've got to take account of some people who are always going to do their politics the way they've always done it. They've been in the House for 30, 40 years. They ain't going to change anytime soon, and that's fine. But the centre of gravity has shifted, and we can be much more forward-looking in what we do. So for 2010 to 2015, we've set ourselves a goal to be much more valued as an institution. And for us, 2015 is a big year. It's the 800th anniversary since the sealing of the Magna Carta, which is also a big deal in the US as well. It's the 750th anniversary of the first assembly of the UK Parliament in 1265. It's an opportunity for us there to really celebrate what democracy is and what Parliament stands for. And we've given ourselves 4 bullet points. We intend to be respected, effective, efficient and informed. And the top bullet point in the whole strategy is having an open and transparent way of doing business. So the conference is spot on. So how do we respond to that? The first thing is that we have a very strong political commitment, particularly in the House of Commons. And the Speaker I've mentioned, but the House of Commons Commission are formally my employer. They comprise the Speaker, the Leader of the House, who's the senior government member, the Shadow Leader of the House, who's the senior opposition member, and 3 senior backbench members from all the parties. And they are driving this agenda for us. And we have a management board, of which I'm part, that's extremely focused on delivering this particular package of things. So key initiatives, this is my last slide. Of the first 2, you're going to hear a little bit more about in the parallel session that Joan Miller, the director of our ICT department, is going to be talking to you tomorrow. But the first 2, and it's interesting, this word didn't come up at all yesterday, is very much part of our efficiency agenda. And our ability to convince members of Parliament who previously have been very reluctant to change has significantly altered because of our problems with public debt and the need to reduce the costs of Parliament, the costs of politics, the cost of the public sector. There is a much greater openness to challenge the way we've done things in the past because of that fiscal problem than I've observed before. So that creates an opportunity for us. So specifically here, I've talked about exploring the cloud, putting our data out there so we can use it in different ways, and having a more device-independent world, letting members, the public, anybody interact with Parliament on whatever kind of piece of kit they like. I mean, we were offered the choice of logging on here using Mac or PC today, but it's going to proliferate. The range of different ways in which we can interact is proliferating, and we must enable and facilitate that. And in doing so, we will save ourselves lots of money. So this is a very popular policy just at the minute and gets political backing because it hits so many hot buttons. And specifically, my second slide, our third biggest budget line after staff costs and buildings costs are printing costs. And that was also mentioned today. Suddenly, everybody wants to put information online because it saves printing costs, it saves the planet because it's greener not to have it on paper, and information online is easier to use and reuse. We can liberate our data, and Mark Bosk has demonstrated some of the ideas in Canada, which we are very eagerly copying and taking from you. Thank you very much. And so the whole idea of moving from printing to the web is a fantastic opportunity to think about openness and transparency in technology in a very creative way. The third one there that I've put, we've talked mainly about data today, although the presentation from Brazil, which I thought was brilliant, was using images. Images are going to become core to what we do. MPs love using the video feeds of what they say. We need to help them package and repackage that, but so does everybody else. So images of Parliament that you can get on YouTube, you can get on all kinds of other websites, you can embed here, there and everywhere, that I've no doubt is the future. And that integrates with the strategy, the print to web. Audio-visual is becoming core. And how we actually capture images of Parliament in action and people interacting with Parliament is going to become a really interesting determinant, I think, of our success. Now, again, from Brazil, we'd heard about the Open Data Initiative, and it was good to see Brazil, the UK, United States, and a few others on that list. I hope after this meeting there'll be a few more countries joining that. I think there is a huge opportunity in this idea of putting data out there in its rawest form so people can use and reuse it and do neat stuff with it that we haven't got the time or the budget to do, but that others can connect with for their own communities, including things like doing lists of parliamentarians voting, doing things which relate to particular issues for communities around the country, particular issues, I know, transport or defence, whatever it is, your community can pick up our stuff, package it together, mash it up with all kinds of other things. Huge potential there. Devices in the chamber, I mention that because I think that does help us to communicate. Maybe we're a bit late on this one, but our House of Commons has quite recently voted to say it doesn't care what device you're using in the chamber, as long as you don't screw up the business or upset the speaker. Having an iPad doesn't actually make any difference. It's just the same as a piece of paper. Just don't abuse it. But that has helped people use Twitter particularly, use other kinds of mechanisms to interact with their constituents and with each other while the business is going on. It's quite challenging, I think, sometimes for us as officials to deal with that, but it, again, is freeing up the political process, making what's going on in the chamber much more real to people. And then finally, how am I doing for time, Jeff? Do I need to shut up, or am I okay?
I would never suggest that the oldest Parliament president should shut up.
Okay, well, new modes of public engagement. I put that at the end as a kind of floater on time, but there's
no one from Iceland here. Carry on.
Okay, well, new modes of public engagement. I'll mention a few until he frowns at me, I guess. The last few years, we've got into video games. Our education department has produced a whole series of award-winning games. I mean, the easiest one to describe is called MP for a Week. And the kids come into this, and you have to try and survive being an MP. And you get points. It's just like any other game that you do. You get points for keeping your party happy, keeping your constituents happy, and keeping the media happy. And as every politician will know, doing all three at once is near on impossible. I lasted till Wednesday, till I got thrown out of my party. But go on to www.parliament.uk/education. You can play these games. The latest one is called My UK, and you have to be the Prime Minister. You have to try and work out how you build coalitions of support to run the country. Now, we're doing that. We have sponsored that within Parliament, but we've got a lot of interest from the games industry. They will put some money into this. They'll help us out with it. But in terms of using technology to engage, it's been really good. And when we had our 232 new members, what were they all trying to do? They were all trying to play MP for a week to work out what to do. That's a kind of fun one. A more serious one is the tools that we are supporting committees to use when they're doing their inquiries. I'll mention two quite recent ones. The first was our finance committee that was trying to look at problems of personal debt in families. Big issue in many countries. Now, in the past, they would have put out a call for evidence. 3 or 4 years ago, they may have put out a call for evidence online on our website. This time, we helped them place their inquiry on a website called moneysavingexpert.com, which claims 4 million people come in there all the time. We placed the chairman of that committee on there. He had interaction with a reasonable number of those 4 million people, and you had a completely different set of individuals giving evidence to that committee than you would ever have got. Now, that is using technology in a very different way. It's using someone else's technology to help you reach people who are already thinking about concerns about public debt, but would never have thought about engaging with Parliament on that subject. So going out to the technology platforms that people are already using is a key part of what we do. And the second one, I will stop after this one, Jeff. Very recently, our Education Committee had called the Secretary of State for Education to come and give evidence to it. And they had a heap of questions they wanted to ask him. But I don't know who had the idea. I guess one of the committee members. Why don't we do something on Twitter? And the Secretary of State's name is Michael Gove. So he set up a Twitter feed called Ask Gove. And they got, it was certainly over 5,000. It might even have been up to 7,000 people, particularly teachers, but also people with children, having a personal opportunity to ask Gove a question. Now, that created a headache, and we've heard about it already, a headache for the committee staff trying to synthesise that. But it gave them material to synthesise, and it gave a certain electricity to that committee hearing that we wouldn't have got otherwise. So we're just experimenting with those kinds of different mediums that help us engage a different kind of audience in a conversation with Parliament. And those 7,000 people, even though their question wasn't being asked, they were going to be tuning in to watch the TV when that hearing was on, because they were part of it. And you don't necessarily have to answer every single question, but you do have to make a connection with people so they see that what you're doing is relevant to them. Then they'll come to you, they'll listen, they'll start engaging, they'll talk to their friends. And maybe then we start to get what we have set as our goal, is the public in the United Kingdom seeing the British Parliament as something that they do respect, they think is something is valued and relevant to their lives, and not, as we felt we were getting into 10 years ago, becoming increasingly separated from them. And technology has a massive part to play in making that work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. I have about 6,000 comments and questions. I'll refrain because I'm sure our distinguished guests will have lots of things they want to talk about. But first we turn, or rather next we turn to Bob Reeves, who's the Deputy Clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives. Bob?
Got that to work. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to try and give you a little background into, I guess, how things work here in the House and what some of the challenges are for us to be able to do a project and to come up with a common goal and to be able to work towards more transparency and openness. As you see in my title, I added the terms a nonpartisan approach. I was glad to see in the first presentation that there was discuss of supporting the institution, and I really think that that's what this is. You know, our approach in the office of the clerk is that we're supporting the institution regardless of the party, and we're trying to do the best thing for the institution. As you may or may not know, the House and the Senate are different. We each have our own support, our own technical abilities. There are some projects that we do work on together. For instance, we work very closely with the Office of the Secretary of the Senate on issues like lobby disclosure, those types of things, public disclosure types of issues. But that's about it. We've also worked with them on XML schemas. There's a common library that's shared between both groups in that. But we kind of develop our own tools and capabilities on our own. The clerk focuses mostly on the support of the floor proceedings. So in some of the parliaments, I know that you have one entity that supports committees, member offices, and your floor proceedings. The clerk, we focus on the floor proceedings. There are other groups that would focus on the other aspects. So for instance, another officer of the House is called the Chief Administrative Officer. And the Chief Administrative Officer is responsible for member offices. Some member offices may even have a technical person in the office, but the way that they get access to the internet, their email, their whole back office structure is supported by the Chief Administrative Officer. Committees, similar. They also have some of their own technical people, but they are supported from an infrastructure perspective by the CAO. The clerk has not been historically involved a lot in committees. I'll mention a little bit more as we move forward here. We are doing some work with committees as with regard to documents and a project that we're working on right now. And I think that mainly comes out of the fact that the clerk is the custodian of documents for the House. And so in that sense is where we found a fit in being able to work with the committees on their documents. Staff, again, people who work here are supported in multiple groups. In the clerk's office, we have our own technical staff, but we do receive the basic network and email and internet access through the CAO's office. But our own footprints on our PCs, the different software that we use to do our job, are supported out of our Legislative Computer Systems office. We also integrate outside agencies in what we do. So it was before my time, but my understanding is back in the 90s, there was a process that was set up that the House would initiate bills. At some point in time, we passed that on to the Government Printing Office. The Government Printing Office had a responsibility of formatting and printing and authenticating the legislation. And then the legislation would be passed to the Library of Congress and would be put on Thomas for display to the public. So that process has pretty much continued as we've moved towards greater transparency. The other piece that we fit into that would be the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA. Their responsibility is for storing the documents of the House. So for instance, if we're in session, our video studio records the video session of the day, and then a copy of that is sent to NARA and stored forever and ever and ever at the National Archives. At the beginning of this Congress, the clerk, as she mentioned in her initial remarks, received a letter from leadership, from Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Cantor. And in that letter, they highlighted some things that they wanted to do to provide leadership in the whole area of openness and transparency. Some of you may recall that back in December, there was an initial meeting. It was termed a hackathon. I really didn't know what that meant. I did attend and kind of listened. My understanding is that in the true sense, a hackathon is where developers get together and they bring in some pizzas and a couple kegs, and then overnight they write a program. Now maybe it's my age, but this was more to my liking. It was only a couple hours into the evening. There wasn't a keg, or nothing to do with a keg. And what they really did was they took 5 different themes and they came up with ideas on how to address those themes. And they ranged in a variety of things. One that I paid a lot of attention to was documents. And there was a group that wanted to talk about, we don't want to screen scrape anymore, and we want bulk documents, and why can't we get a schedule all in one place, and those types of things. And there were other groups that focused on trying to solve issues with technology that may deal with a member office responding to their constituents. So I think it was a really good meeting. There was a good focus on it. And it was really the first in a series of meetings that leadership has kind of guided us towards. The second meeting was a meeting that was held just earlier this month. It was the Standards and Transparency Conference. It was a one-day meeting. It brought together a lot of in-house and staff from the local agencies that help support the different things that go on here, as well as civil societies. It was not international in perspective. It was a U.S. perspective. And I think there was an opportunity there to discuss a range of issues. And I think it was very positive. And the third piece of these 3 meetings is this international meeting that we're having today. And again, the idea is to have that open discussion and to be able to share challenges, share solutions, be able to maybe avoid issues if someone's already gone through something like that with a discussion, and say, hey, I know you're going through this, but maybe you could do this. So that's kind of the purpose, and I think that leadership is giving us direction on where they would like to see our focus. Just to step back to what the focus of the Office of the Clerk is, the mission is to provide procedural assistance and support necessary for the orderly conduct and dissemination of official business of the House. So all of the business that goes through the House floor, we're supporting those activities. Some of these activities broken down I'll just point out a couple of them, but the rules of the House of Representatives and federal law charge the clerk with administering a range of legislative services. A couple of that I've highlighted here: managing lobby disclosure and financial disclosure, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, custodian of non-current records of House committees and House officers. Some of the other issues that affect our ability to work on different projects that are geared toward transparency and towards openness. Limited number of staff. The clerk and I meet every other week with the chief and deputy chief of our legislative computer systems group, and we review a project management document that has a list of all the projects we're currently working on. They're placed in a priority order. And at that point in time, we get updates on each of those projects, and we also have the opportunity at that time to maybe change the priority if something has come up that would warrant to do that. So one of the things that I'm sure some of you are aware of recently was the passing, although it's not final form yet, of the Stock Act. So when it becomes final form, one of the things that it potentially will do is tell the Office of the Clerk and the Office of the Secretary of the Senate that you have certain responsibilities to be able to provide a vehicle for members to provide information about stock transactions within a certain period of time. And it will no doubt give us a period of time to be able to transition, but then it will say at the end of this period of time, you're going to have this in place. Well, that kind of changes our priorities. So we may have been working on 3 or 4 different applications, and we suddenly now have to put one to the top of the list, which affects our ability to complete the other ones in at least the time frame that we thought we were going to be able to do it. Budget. I know that all of you are suffering from the same things that we're suffering from. All of us are suffering from having a reduced amount of money to be able to do the things that we need to do. Multiple projects. As I mentioned, we have mandated House projects. So anything having to do with meeting a rule or a piece of legislation, a mandate that says we have to do something within a certain period of time, always floats to the top of our priority list. House projects. An example of this would be something like House Live. You know, it's been almost 2 years since we rolled out House Live. We had a series of updates last year that we made to the product. We're hopefully in a couple weeks going to roll out a new version, which has a much more user-friendly, user experience kind of face to it, with providing the information that we provide. Within the Office of the Clerk, we have other responsibilities as well. So we also produce the House phone book. Well, the previous version, I say previous version because we're about to use a new version for this next version of the House phone book, was, and maybe something you've heard of, an old DBase database system, which caused us a lot of angst in updating it, in getting information from the various groups within the House to be able to update it. So we've had a project ongoing for the last year and a half to make this a web-based product, to make the interaction between other House groups and committees and our own folks easier, and to make our life easier in producing that phone book in a more timely fashion and making it more accurate as well. So, I mean, that's an example of an in-house project that helps us do our job better, that affects everyone else in the House. Internal projects. We also have other stuff within the Office of the Clerk that doesn't necessarily touch other entities. One of the projects that we'd really like to do is revise all of our websites. As I see this project list, we're getting more and more added to it. This is a nice to do, not necessarily a have to do. It's not that it's broken, it's just that we would like to make it nicer. We'd like to make the user experience better. We'd like to maybe brighten it up. The design is several years old and it needs a refresh. But the fact of the matter is that it's going to slide down on the priority list as we have more important projects to support the House. Maintenance projects. All of us have maintenance projects that we have to continue to do. security updates. All of us have updates that need to be done on a weekly basis or sooner for all the products that we use, whether they be Microsoft or another vendor, that you just have to do in order to maintain the security of your system. So these things have to be done all the time. And then once you build a system, you've got to maintain it. So we have a lobby disclosure system that on a quarterly basis lobbyists file. Well, there are things that we have to do on a quarterly basis, notifications to the lobbyists, maintaining the system up and running in a well-managed fashion. We recently updated the interface that Mac users had, because previously it wasn't a good interface, and we'd like to extend that to other PC users. But these are things that they're applications that once developed, we have to maintain them. And we have to be able to provide the information that those applications are gathering. And even if we see an opportunity to maybe do it in a better way, we still have to keep it running. Time. Well, there's only so many hours in a day, so many days in a week. So you manage the number of people that you have with the amount of time that it's going to take to do something, and hopefully you get the number of things that you're looking to accomplish completed. Priorities and changing priorities. As I mentioned, we have a list of priorities. We work on our projects in a priority fashion, and then as things come up, we change the priorities to deal with business. It's no different than a regular business. I spent 25 years working in the IT industry and private business, and you deal with priority changes because the business changes. Well, it's no different here. The business of the house changes, so do our priorities. When there's a conflict, we're going to move whatever is best for the institution to the top of the list. Some of the initiatives that we're working on. As many of you know, we rolled out a website called docs.house.gov. This is a direct reflection of the letter from leadership to have all of the documents of the House on a single website, accessible in an open format. The first phase of the project was rolled out, I think it was like January 17th or 13th, something like that. And this focused on the House floor. So it focused on the documents, the schedule, the documents that are going to be discussed for the House floor, for the upcoming, I think, a week at a time that we do that. Phase 2 of this project, which we started right towards the end of the year gathering requirements for, one of the things that we have developed is the standard file naming convention. And the second piece that we're working on right now is finalizing the requirements for what we're going to do with all of the committees. Our Committee on House Administration developed a standards document for committees. Now, I don't know exactly how your committees work, but our committees have several documents that they create just as part of their process. So we talked about some of them earlier, just votes. So votes is one of them. But there are other things like a witness list, witness testimony, these different types of documents. Well, not all of our committees do all of these documents the same way. So one of our challenges in this open documents effort in docs.house.gov is going to be to come up with some commonality to be able to provide a website that you can go to and look at all the documents from all the committees. The goal is to have that up and available at the beginning of 2013. Initially, the standards say that the document has to at least be in a PDF format. We do have a lot of the documents available in XML, and certainly if we have them in XML, they'll be available in XML on this website. HouseLive.gov. I mentioned just a little bit that we're about to release a refresh. This version of HouseLive.gov will focus on the user experience. It's a much cleaner experience. Some of you that have gone to HouseLive.gov, when you get there, you've got to then you see the little arrow on the video, and you got to click the arrow to get the video to work. Well, we've worked on some enhancements to that. The new version of HouseLive.gov, when you get to the web page, if we are in session, the video will be streaming. It will be playing. If we're not in session, what you'll see is a not in session message, and then there'll be a message that says when we're going to be in session next. Some of the other things we've kind of streamlined, taking some of the verbiage off of the page, maybe putting it in drop downs, that type of thing, to clean up the page and the way it looks. So the next couple of weeks, that's something that we'll be releasing. The potential Stock Act legislation, that's just something that's really high on our priority list at this point in time. Even though we don't know what we're going to do exactly, we know we're going to do something. So it's one of those things where we're looking at the legislation, and then we'll look at whatever changes come about that actually get agreed to, so that we can be prepared to move forward with that. And then looking at or accessing additional methods of reaching the public, social media. The Office of the Clerk, in our role as stating the facts, we don't currently have a presence in social media, but we are looking at, if we do it, how would we do it? How can we do it in a non-political manner that would just be able to put the facts out there and still make it something that's worthwhile to the public to look at? So we are looking at that, looking at how we might be able to do something with Facebook or Twitter or both. I don't really have a time frame on that right now for when we would roll something out, but we do think that there's a possibility that that's something that we'll be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Before we open for questions, just a comment or two. I was intrigued with John Pullinger's comment about the growth and the importance of audio and video as well as documents. And so it's quite clear that next year's conference, which I'm sure you'll be pleased to host, will have to be on open standards for audio and video materials. And if you think it's a challenge to do it for documents, you can imagine what it's going to be like to do it for audio and video formats. Any time in the good time of the year in the UK will be fine.
It's always raining.
Just a few comments. The presenters underscored what for me have been sort of always a personal view about the organizational and especially the management issues when you confront technology. And the first, I have three principles. The first is that nothing gets started without support from the top, the senior political decision makers, and both John and Bob underscored that very significantly in their presentations. It was the people at the top who decided that things needed to move forward. Otherwise, nothing really gets done. That can be a blessing or it can be a bane, depends on whether that's where you wanted to go. But in a sense, it doesn't matter. If the senior political leadership decides that's where they want to go, or that's what they need to do, or that's what the institution needs, then that's where we're going. Implicit in that is the assumption that there are the resources to accomplish that. That part of the equation is sometimes left off by the decision makers. They think the decision is sufficient, and the statement, well, just do more with less, is a statement about resources. Well, it can be a statement about resources, but it's not a very helpful one. As we know only too well, Bob has to juggle multiple projects, and XML is just one of those. My second principle is that nothing gets worked on unless the operational manager, and I make that plural, operational managers, are committed to managing it. In projects as complicated as open standards for our documents are touched by many offices, and all of the managers in those offices need to work on these initiatives together in some collective format. Otherwise, any one office can always be a roadblock to moving forward. And my final observation would be nothing gets done unless the people who actually have to do the work, those who are actually down there making the code or changing or preparing the documents, actually believe in this new approach. That is, do they share the vision that originated at the top? So it's not just a matter of deciding and moving forward. All the levels have to be addressed in all of this. So with that brief comment, let me open the floor to discussion, questions, comments, as you like. Yes.
Okay, I agree with you, Jeff. I appreciate the presentations and the ICT strategy that you show us. By the way, your strategies, I come from the Italian Senate. Your ICT strategy is very close to our strategy, except for the first point. We have a different first point, that is cut saving costs. That's what you were saying just now. So the challenge is how to do more with less, how to discuss with our bosses, with our how we manage to do that. The question that I want to do is some more details about the process of decision making, about your ICT strategy, how you discuss with the clerk and with the political part of the house, and how they approve your ICT strategy. Thank you.
That's a very rich question. So before we take in any others, let me just give the panelists a few moments to comment on that. I'm sure both of you can wax on for quite a while about that. But what are your thoughts about that?
I'll take it in a kind of the levels that Jeff outlined. I was tempted when he outlined his various levels of who needs to be aligned just to leave, because it's impossible to do everything if you need all of those things. But at the first level, the political level, which I think is where it does have to start, I think what has happened in our environment since 2010 with the impact of budget cuts has, for the first time in my experience, actually concentrated the political mind. That they can't just ask us for this because they fancy it, because you've got to understand what the trade-off is. So we have got a requirement to find 17% savings in our budget. Everybody knows that number, the politicians and the staff. And so some of these initiatives that previously would have been very hard to get going, stopping printing things, for example, politicians we thought were very attached to their paper. But when you go around and ask them in that environment, they're saying, why aren't you taking it away from us? So the dynamic has changed. So that opens the door. So that's the first level of it. In terms of approving the ICT strategy, we have two houses. They operate separately in the same way that they do in the US and in Italy. But we have a single joint ICT department, and Joan Miller, its director, is sitting immediately behind you and will be talking tomorrow. But the two management boards, headed by the clerks of the two houses, agree the ICT strategy, effectively. And they are supported by a body which we've created, which is the Parliamentary ICT Advisory Board, which, as it happens, I chair, but it's a board of the senior members of the management in both houses. And that group looks at the various proposals for IT investments, and prioritises them, and specifically at the moment looks at the likely savings that are going to come out of the changes if they come to fruition. And the prioritisation process in terms of finance has really, again, sharpened up our minds. So the two examples I put there are high up our list because we expect them to deliver significant savings to the bottom line of the parliamentary budget. But there's a whole heap of other things in there that are going to improve the way we work. Some of the things that we heard about on buildings maintenance, all these things, you still have to do them. But it's that group. So in terms of your specific question, what is the decision-making process? It's this Parliamentary IT Advisory Board. It's been going for several years now, but as it's gone on, it's increasingly been given more responsibilities because the questions have become tougher. And that group, every member of the boards of both houses can come any time to make sure their voice is heard. But fundamentally, we have to try and make that choice. And so far it seems to work. It's not got too ghastly yet, has it, Joan? Do you want to add anything about how we make the decisions?
I think it
In the-
helps when you take a strategy that says we want to do more for less. And the fact that we are putting in place a number of activities around the IT that helps the business of the house and at the same time makes savings, makes it a really easy deal for people to agree. But I think the opportunity for me to talk with other management board members in PICTAB in a at-length basis, but also based on what their business requirements are matched with the IT opportunities, means that when it comes to formal decision-making in the management boards, it's a much quicker activity.
Well, we don't have a formal board that makes decision. I guess you could say that leadership in their role as leadership can tell us what they would like us to do, and we're going to, of course, in most cases, make that a priority. One of the things that was appreciated at the beginning of this Congress was the commitment of leadership to this whole openness and open documents and transparency type of initiative. The ideas can come from various places. There are certainly cases where leadership may say, hey, we'd like you to look at doing this. There may be cases that in our own group that we come up with an idea and we run it back up the chain and say, hey, we had an idea to do this. What do you think about this? That works that way too. There are other entities in the House that may also have some ideas. Committees. Some of the committees have, they're a little more autonomous, but they'll have ideas for new technologies that is not across the board, but maybe within that one committee. And they'll be able to move forward with that. But we've had several common projects, I think, that show that even though we're kind of decentralized, that when we work on an objective together, we can do it very well. I'll cite the docs.house.gov website. This was working with two committees initially, the Rules Committee and the Committee on House Administration, working with leadership, working with our parliamentarians. So multiple groups that had to have input into what are we trying to do and how is this thing going to work before we could sit down to build it. So I think on issues where it is for the common good of the House that we've shown that we can work together very well, but there is not that same centralized kind of decision-making body. We've also worked on things for cutting costs. We've worked with the Committee on House Administration on making documents that we previously printed. For instance, one of the things is every 6 months we provide every member with a list of all their votes. And at the beginning of this year, well, not the beginning of this year, let's say the first opportunity to provide that list in July, what we did is we actually emailed it. So we didn't print the documents. And one of the things that we found was, well, guess what? There wasn't a lot of member offices that came back and said, well, would you print it for us? So I can't tell you how many didn't print it in their own office, but I can tell you that the change in going to the delivery of a document in an automated fashion as opposed to printing it out and carrying it over was welcome. And we did it again at the end of the year, the same voting report that we provide, as I said, twice a year.
Thank you, Bob. Let me just add, if I may, it sounds like an oxymoron, but a crisis is a wonderful opportunity. Crises that involve significant reduction in the availability of resources can, ironically, be an opportunity to do things in new and innovative ways, and the usual objections are more difficult to make. I think back to the famous year 2000. You remember all the dollars that we were spending trying to make sure that the systems, our systems would work when we moved from 1999 to the year 2000. Some of you I know are too young to remember that phase. But there was an enormous effort to convert a lot of systems, but it had one side benefit, which we found a lot of legacy systems that had one or two users. They were passionate users, but they were one or two users. And it was a great opportunity to say, we're not going to convert that system anymore. We're just going to get rid of it, and you'll have to use something else. And they grumbled, and sure enough, those systems went away and were not to be delivered anymore. I'm struck by some of the things we're seeing on in the international parliamentary community as this interesting conjoining of the need to reduce costs at the very time that tablets are becoming more usable and attractive to members. And so there are a number of parliaments that have already taken initiative to reduce, if not totally eliminate, the publication of paper in the plenary sessions and by providing their members instead with tablets and electronic access. And this is being funded by the cost savings in printing. That is, the Dutch Senate, and I know in Estonia the same thing, they've been able to pay for, Italy as well in the chamber, they've been able to pay for the tablets simply by the reduction in paper printing costs. So there can be some interesting opportunities. The challenge in terms of the focus of our workshop, our conference here, is does XML, do open standards, provide us with those same kinds of cost savings? Now, there's a cost curve in implementation, but can there be a net result of savings? Perhaps we'll hear some more about this in the technical sessions tomorrow. But I think that's one of the key issues that we do have to address with regard to the use of open standards. I think it is. Because open standards are something new and they have to be added on to existing legacy systems or conversions have to take place. It is not a no-cost solution. You have to be sure that the problem you're solving needs to be solved and that there can be some net savings as a result. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Ann Washington, Professor of Public Policy at George Mason University. I'm going to bring in a little bit of theory here. That traditionally, IT development organizations goes through a series of stages. So traditionally, you go through a technology silo, you get things electronic, it's digital, that's great. Then you move into standards, and we're clearly at that phase. But fundamentally, the cost savings that are essential happen when you have the infrastructure to support everything. In other words, with infrastructure, you get modularity, you get the ability to build on it, and you can have lots of forms of agile development. So it's clear most parliaments, particularly here in the US, we've moved away from local control and technology silos. We have standards. But I really want you to discuss for both parliaments the challenges of getting management and political support for infrastructure, the technology infrastructure that moves us forward.
Which of you is brave enough to start with that?
I'm brave enough for that one. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about our governance arrangements was, how we ended up with a parliamentary IT department in the first place. And we needed an act of parliament to set it up. And we had the silos, and we had some slightly half-hearted attempts at standards, but it clearly wasn't going to be good enough for what we were going to need to do. And the infrastructure, as much as anything else, was creaking, partly because we were in this old building and it hadn't really been rewired for a long time, and rather straightforward things like that. So we set up, by Act of Parliament, this new central department. And in setting it up, Joan Miller was appointed as its first head, and the main message she gave to both management boards on arrival was, there's no point in you setting me up unless you give me the money to fix the infrastructure. And that was a pretty powerful and clear message, and that's what she did. And she said, there's no point in me working on new systems for you until we've done that opening piece. And we did that, and when she did that, that also gave credibility to the department to give itself license to start thinking about some of the systems we're now developing, and to think about the cloud, and to think about open source and different options, which is where we are now. But I agree with your kind of theory that until you've got the infrastructure in place, it's very difficult to move into a more modular, agile, flexible kind of environment. But we think we're almost there yet. I mean, it's a bit slow for my taste, but there we go. And Joan knows this. But she's keeps me and the other kind of keen people feet on the ground. That you've got to do the basics and get the basics right before you have the potential, or before you can realise the potential. But she'll tell you a bit more about this tomorrow. I won't invite her in now, otherwise it's going to be a bit of a funny double act. But Bob.
As I mentioned earlier, from the House perspective, we have a group that focuses on infrastructure. So HIR, the House Information Resources Group, which is a part of the CAO's office, one of their focuses is on networks, Wi-Fi, upgrading the email products, spam filtering, all those types of things that, when they're done right, help those of us writing applications for other focuses to make it more easier for us to do our job. I don't know. I know that the Committee on House Administration plays a role in working with our HIR group in what their priorities are, what the focus is with regards to security and who's trying to hack in and stuff like that. I'm not as up on exactly how they know what their priorities are. Within the Office of the Clerk, we do a little bit of duplication of some of that. So even though we're getting a clean internet feed, we still in our data center will do some things to protect ourselves from intrusions and those kinds of things, just as kind of a secondary protection. Where we maybe stand a little bit alone is we handle all of the technology on the House floor. So the voting system, that's a direct connection from our data center to the House floor. It doesn't touch a LAN or a WAN or the internet anywhere. The only way that information gets from our voting system to the network is by actually taking it off on a USB drive or something like that and putting it on the network. So all of the infrastructure on the House floor we're involved in, but then again, if it involves running a new network line or adding additional power or hooking up a new backup generator, there are other groups involved in that as well, including the CAO and the Architect of the Capitol's office, so it's more of a coordinated effort. But in the 4 years I've been here, I really haven't seen an issue with HIR and a focus on trying to maintain a good infrastructure. Not to say and that every office everywhere is happy that they hit enter and it didn't come back immediately, because we all go through that. We have that expectation both at work and at home that I typed in the website, why is it not coming up? So, but there are different things that happen on the network that are coming from different groups that I'm just not aware of everything that happens. I think one of the things that probably most people would note that over the last couple of years, there's really been, and hopefully you have it in here today, a good access to Wi-Fi for your mobile devices, House Public. I know that has been a focus of theirs over the last couple of years, and when I knew we were having this conference down here, they did come down and make sure that we were going to have, the ability for X number of people to be on at the same time and be able to do what they needed to do. So I think we kind of have a direction on that. Thank you.
A couple other quick comments about that. One, infrastructure takes time, and it's always a challenge because the director of IT says, I can't do anything for you the next 18 months because I'm fixing the infrastructure. It does not go over very well. Number two, the problem with infrastructure is you can't see it. There are people down there connecting wires and building servers, and they're down in the dungeon, and nobody wants to talk to them, and they say, where have you been for 18 months? Well, I've been down fixing the infrastructure. It's almost ready. That's why I go back to my first principle. If you don't have support from the top who understands that infrastructure takes time, you might as well not start. because you're just going to get a lot of grief about it. But the final point I'd like to make is that, as many of you know, we at the Global Center do a survey every 2 years of the state of technology globally. And in the last report that we did, based on the 2009 survey, the report published in 2010, we did some assessment of where parliaments as a whole were, as a group were, in various categories, such as management, websites, engagement with citizens, document management systems, and infrastructure. And the category that had the highest score globally was infrastructure. The implication is that infrastructure is, in fact, while it is expensive and hard to see, it's in better shape globally in parliaments than lots of other things like open document standards and websites and citizen participation through social media. So your concern is well justified. There's some reason to be optimistic on that particular item. Other questions? Sir.
Thank you. Well, just to remind everybody that the survey is out now, the new one. But the question is, are the rules and procedures of the House, or whatever name each parliament has for the rules, are these rules an obstacle for the implementation of ICT? There were changes over the years. Could they be an excuse for members of parliament not to advance on certain issues? This is not just a question for the two panelists, but maybe to all parliaments. How did you confront with that?
Bob, why don't you start?
As I mentioned, one of the things that the current Congress did at the beginning of the Congress was to change the rules. I look over to my right because one of the gentlemen that's involved in the rules, one of our parliamentarians, is sitting over there. So I think the rules, the new version of the rules has made it, especially like, let's say, for technology on the House floor, that types of thing, has kind of left it a little bit more to the discretion of the Speaker as to what is appropriate. But certainly all of the communications from leadership have been both to member offices, committees, and to the other supporting bodies in the House that we want more openness, that's acceptable. I know that in the House there's probably, I want to say 65-70% of the members are using social media, for instance. So. And we also earlier there was some comment about large turnovers in your bodies, and this last Congress I think we had close to 100 like a 25% turnover in the House, and there are a lot of the newer members are much more in touch with technology. If you watch C-SPAN or House Live, you will see iPads on the House floor. You can't use the cameras on those iPads, but you are allowed to use it to keep notes and that type of thing.
I think my answer to your precise question, are rules of procedure an obstacle, is no. But I refer back to the comment someone made, I think it was Mark Bosk, that the issues around technology are more about procedure than they are about technology. And I think you have to stand back and think quite carefully about each issue that comes up. I mentioned in my presentation the use of iPads and Twittering while you're on the floor of the House, and our procedure committee came up with what I thought was a very wise judgment on that. It doesn't actually make very much difference. It's what impact your use of that technology has on the debate that counts, and technology itself is irrelevant. But some other areas are trickier. One that is very contentious for us at the moment is electronic petitioning. And our procedure committee has debated this at length several times over recent years. We've had a physical petitioning system for centuries in the British Parliament. We haven't quite been able to grasp with what a technology system would actually look like. And the government got irritated by the fact that Parliament was taking so long and just invented their own and did it, and it's a nightmare. And so we now have this thing that's effectively a parliamentary process that's sitting on the executive's website in number 10 Downing Street that supposedly triggers a debate in Parliament whenever 100,000 people sign some electronic document. And it's mad. And it's because we haven't thought through the procedure properly. But that doesn't mean the procedure is an obstacle. It means we have to really think what is the interaction between a technological opportunity that we now have and what Parliament actually wants to do. And you've got to anchor yourself in what Parliament wants to do. If you know that, procedure isn't an obstacle because the procedure can either be amended or it can be used, and that's within the discretion of the House. And if members want it, they'll get it. So I don't think it's an obstacle, but you have to think very hard about what's going to happen.
So one thing that struck me in particular about both of your talks earlier, but in particular, your talk earlier was one, that there is an annual audit of political engagement that's performed, and also that as a way of making the case to leadership, you brought in user communities to talk about how to structure the website. And I was curious, have you, how often do you use this type of conversation with those outside of Parliament in terms of trying to decide priorities or make recommendations or backstop the efforts that you're engaging in as part of options presentations to leadership in terms of determining where to invest time, effort, resources, and so on?
Yeah, all the time is probably the most obvious answer to that question. I mean, I would like us to be much more systematic than we are in evaluation and getting feedback from people. But I think the only way you really get good services is to understand what the people using the services think of them. And the best way of doing that is to watch them using it, which is what we mainly do with the website usability work. We just sit people in a room, including members of Parliament, and watch them use our website and see how annoyed they get. And that gives you a pretty rapid idea of what the priority is to fix. I mean, at the moment, it's our search engine. It's rubbish. And we need to do something about that, and particularly on the intranet rather than the website. And you just have to watch users. And that is a real wake-up call to the people sitting in my team whose responsibility for usability of the website. So all the time is the answer to that. And that helps build the case for everything that we need to do. Visiting, I talked about, the experience of visitors. You ask them what they feel about their visit, and they tell you they don't really like people sticking guns in their faces. And it's not great rocket science, but it has a lot of power if it's actually a voice of a user rather than the voice of a manager behind it. The audit of political engagement has a slightly different role. I mean, it's an annual thing. It's been going for some years now. It's run by an organisation called the Hansard Society, which is an independent charity whose sole interest is in politics. It gives us some metrics, but again, referring to Mark Bosk earlier, I mean, we're not the only people that influence what people think about Parliament, and so we don't want to hook ourselves too much on that. But what that annual audit does is it gives us a fantastic opportunity for a debate. So we will normally have a debate with leading parliamentarians from all the parties talking about the state of the relationship between Parliament and the people. And as ever in politics, it's often the debate that counts as much as the numbers. So that gives us a focus for having a discussion, and that then starts to direct the priorities. This is what people are telling us about what they think about this place this year. So what are we going to do about it? And quite often there's a pretty strong cross-party consensus on that kind of stuff, which is how we keep ourselves impartial and keep ourselves clean in this kind of thing. So we have an intensely political debate as an impartial service on the back of this kind of feedback we're getting from the people. So does that answer the question? All the time is my answer.
But it answers a large part of the question. I guess part of what I didn't articulate well was, are there ways that you bring either outside organizations into the conversation in a more official kind of way, besides sort of monitoring how websites are being used? Or do you look at, other entities that are reusing legislative information as a guide to, this is what we could do better, this is what we're doing much better than these other folks, and they're mucking around with our data, or whatever it may happen to be? Is that a process that you engage in as well, where when you sit down once a quarter and you say, okay, what are priorities? What's going on in the outside world? Do you bring in outside folks to have these conversations, or is it more of a passive kind of conversation where you look to see what they're doing, but you don't necessarily talk to them as much?
Passive is a bit strong, but probably yes. I mean, I would like to do more of this. I think the deeper you have the conversations, the more you learn from them. But as ever, that tends to be the last of your priority list. You're too busy doing so I think we could do better with that. We could have richer conversations with people. But we have a go.
Thank you all. Thanks to our panelists, and thank you all for your comments and questions. Very interesting, very insightful. We'll reconvene at 2:30 in this room after lunch. We'll see you all then. Thank you.